You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 249. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever noticed that it's in those moments where you need your confidence the most? Often this is a time where there's a great degree of uncertainty. Those are also the very same moments where you feel the least amount of confidence. It's a little bit like breathing. If you think about how we go about our daily lives and we just breathe as we do as humans, probably right now you're breathing away. You may not even thought about it until I mentioned it. And unless there was some reason to think about it, right? Like if I asked you to hold your breath, you might be fine for a few minutes, but then when you start to get a little tired, right, you start to notice, hey, Paula, like this is going on for a while. When do I get to breathe again? Until you start to feel that sense of deprivation, you don't even notice that you're doing it. And confidence is that same way, right? We don't really notice it until we notice it. And then all of a sudden, it becomes that imperative thing, that thing that we need in order to move forward. And today's podcast episode is about confidence, and it's about building a bridge between uncertainty and confidence. And the reason that I want to talk about this today is that it's something that I see so often in my coaching practice with lawyers. It is that relationship between uncertainty and confidence and wanting to feel that sense of confidence in moments of uncertainty and the real challenge that it presents. And it presents a real challenge in the moment. And I know it's a challenge that will present itself repeatedly, right? Anytime we are faced with uncertainty, and the degree of uncertainty will vary, the stakes will vary, the degree of risk will vary, but there's that gap between confidence and uncertainty. And the question is, what do you do in the face of it, right? And sometimes it's in the workplace. You've got a trial, or you've got a meeting, or you've got a project, or you've got a conversation where there is uncertainty. You know that you want to do it or need to do it, but you're hesitant, you're scared because you feel like you lack confidence. And so how do you bridge the gap there? Or you might be in a job situation, I see this often, where you aren't particularly happy where you are. You know this is not your long-term solution, and you want to make a move, but you don't because you don't feel confident about what comes next, right? Or you've made the decision, you know you want to leave, but you're worried, you're reluctant, you're hesitant to make a move until you feel certain that the next move is going to be the right move. I have so many lawyers that I talk to who want that. I want to feel confident making my next move. And so the question here, the thing I'm trying to help you with today is bridging the gap. How do you solve for confidence when there is uncertainty in the equation? It makes perfect sense. You can see how it comes up. And I would also offer to you that part of the problem is that we have created a link between uncertainty and confidence such that the two are wrapped up with each other. So if you think about confidence and your personal definition of confidence, to what degree do you tie that to certainty? And if we look online, for example, to see how confidence has been defined, there's a wonderful, tidy definition offered in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which states the quality or state of being certain. So confidence is defined as the quality or state of being certain. So what happens then, right? If you don't actually feel certain, can you still feel confident? So how might this show up in your practice? I've given you some examples, but let's put you in the driver's seat. And I would love for you to think about places where confidence and certainty may be creating a bit of a roadblock for you. So for example, you might be in a meeting and you want to stick up your hand, you want to say something, but you hesitate or you don't say anything at all because you're uncertain about the outcome, right? What if you say the wrong thing? What if you say something and other people don't like it? What if you say something and people judge you? What happens with that uncertainty, right, is that it then undermines your sense of confidence to the point that maybe you don't say anything at all, right? Same could hold true for projects at work. Maybe you know that you want to grow your practice. You want to take on more challenging files. You want to be lead counsel on the deal, on the trial, but you hold yourself back because you are not certain that if you were to take on that role, that you would do a good job, that you would get the outcome you want. It's especially tricky for lawyers. It's especially tricky when the risk that you're taking on is not necessarily even your risk. It is the client's risk. And so you can layer onto the challenge, the difficulty of the problem itself, also managing that relationship with you and the client, managing the relationship with you and you, how you handle uncertainty on somebody else's behalf. Uncertainty might be keeping you from putting your name in the hat for a promotion. You might want to be partner, but you don't even want to tell anybody because what if they say no? What if there's uncertainty in that whole process? What if you go through the process and then you still don't make it and then you feel embarrassed or you feel like maybe this isn't the right spot? You might be avoiding a difficult conversation. I see this all the time. A conversation about the career path that you're on, a conversation with a client to delineate some boundaries, a conversation with your employer to tell them that things are not working, a conversation with somebody who reports to you because you need to give them feedback on the work that they're doing and you don't want to have a conversation that might leave them feeling unhappy, a conversation that might cause them to quit. And so instead, you don't have the conversation. So this is just a few examples. I also shared the example of a job, right? You might be in a job where you know you want to go, but the alternatives are uncertain. And so without the confidence that leaving job A and going to job B would be better, without that certainty, without that confidence, you don't move forward. So today's episode is all about looking at confidence through the lens of certainty and uncertainty, the link between the two. And what I'd love to offer to you today are some bridges. So bridges to get from uncertainty to confidence. And if you want to think of this in your mind's eye, you might imagine that you're standing on one side of a river. You're on riverbed A, which is uncertainty. So you might think of something for you right now that feels uncertain, right? Maybe it's one of the things that I've already mentioned, right? It's a conversation that you need to have. I know, I know for myself, there's always a conversation I could be having somewhere in some domain of my life, right? Maybe it's career related. Maybe it's in my personal life. So for you, maybe there's a conversation that you know that if you had that conversation, there would be uncertainty, right? There's a reason why you don't want to do it, but you know that on the other side of it, you'll have at least clarity. You'll have perhaps more certainty, right? But you're still at that stuck point. You might think about other areas where there's uncertainty, right? Maybe it's taking on a new project, right? Do you want to take on that speaking engagement, for example? Maybe somebody's approached you. They want you to speak at an upcoming conference and you really want to do it, but you're scared. You're scared because you haven't done it before. You're scared because you have done it before and you know how much work it can be. What if you do the conference? What if you speak and people judge you and they don't think you did a very good job? Or what if they think you did a great job? And then all of a sudden you've got all these people reaching out to you, then what? So what I'd invite you to think about is you on one side of the riverbed in the land of uncertainty, and where you want to get to is the other side of the river, which is confidence, right? We're going to take that definition from Merriam-Webster. We're going to say, okay, if confidence is the quality or state of being certain, if those two are kind of going hand in hand, how do we get so that uncertainty bridges, right? How do we build a bridge over that river to that place of confidence, right? How do we build that bridge? And taking that analogy a little bit further, I like the idea of a river because your river might be more of a stream. If you think about the gap that you need to bridge, if what you're uncertain about or lacking confidence about is something of small stakes, right? I think about cooking as being a very low stakes opportunity to test, to try your confidence. How confident do you feel making mango chicken curry? The risks are pretty low. If you do it wrong, you end up with a bad meal. But the stakes may be a lot bigger. And when the stakes are bigger, it's a client whose custody of their children is at stake. You play a pivotal role. It is a company who wants to sell its operation to another company, and you need to be the one to make sure that that happens seamlessly. You're going to court, and it's a big contract that is in dispute, and there are millions of dollars at stake. The weight of the responsibility is bigger. That river isn't a stream anymore. It is a raging river. And so how do you go from one side to the other, depending on the size of the river? So the tools that I'm going to offer to you today, the bridges that I'm going to suggest, are of course going to vary in complexity in terms of how fortified those bridges will need to be, depending on the size of the river that you are trying to cross. So hopefully that analogy helps you a little bit and also helps to normalize that feeling of uncertainty, that sort of the correlation between confidence and certainty that you might feel in the moment. The bigger the stretch, the bigger the gap, right? The bigger the challenge may be for you to feel that sense of confidence or to overcome a sense of lacking confidence, right? That feeling of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, whatever that feels like for you. How do we overcome that and move you into action? So we're going to start with the first. I've got 4 different bridge building strategies to offer. And the first of those is going to be fairly self-evident and one that I would imagine you've already tried, one that you're already doing. So if you want to reduce the uncertainty, you want to build one bridge from uncertainty to confidence, you're going to want a process. Now, there's 2 ways to look at this. Actually, I'm going to take a step back. You're going to want to reduce uncertainty in the factual matrix in which you're operating, okay? And this gives a little bit more space for me to talk about 2 concepts. One is process and one is outcome. So we want to reduce uncertainty in terms of the result. And the way that we're going to do that is, number 1, by focusing on the process, and number 2, focusing on the list of potential outcomes. So the process is, how do you get from point A to point B? And for example, if you were to work with me as your coach and what you were trying to do was build a strategy or go from one job to another, and you'd never done this before, or you'd done it, but not for many years, then what you would probably be asking me about is, well, how do you do that? How do you go from job A to job B? And so I would offer a process. Here are the steps that I would take you through in order to get you there. You might think about a mentor at work who maybe is going to help you with a cross-examination that you're preparing for. Maybe it's a really tricky one. And so you seek out the advice of someone who's done this more times than you have, maybe someone who's had experience in this nuanced way of cross-examining. Now, if you're not going to cross-examine, then think about what that would look like for you, right? If it's dealing with maybe a complicated tax question that comes up on a file, or maybe it's the way of speaking with a particular client who you know to be a really amazing client, but someone with whom you have to be very delicate in your communication. So you might seek out the advice of a lawyer who has worked with that client before. What do they recommend in terms of strategy? So the process is the recipe, right? If you go back to the mango chicken example, what have other people done in the past to put together that recipe? So that's your process. And by focusing on a process and then following that process, what you do is you reduce uncertainty. Now, it's never perfect. I don't think that one person's process is 100% of the time going to work for another person. Now, there may be clear steps that you need to follow. There may be check marks. There may be steps you need to complete along the way. And so there is an element of that. However, there's also something to be said about everybody having a unique set of strengths, a unique set of values, a unique way of doing things. And so what one person's process may be, and that is successful for them, may not necessarily be your process, right? And that will, of course, depend on the task, right? If it's really, really rubber stamp routine, then sure, maybe their process becomes your process. If it's not, then you might need to build in room for you to be adapting the process. Now, the other way that we reduce uncertainty in the factual matrix is to look at potential outcomes. Now, one of the reasons that people don't want to do things is because they look at the potential outcomes and often jump to best case, worst case scenarios, right? In the best case example, I win the trial, my client is delighted, they celebrate me, they tell all their friends what a great lawyer I am, and the world is perfect, right? There's not a single glitch, I'm so well prepared, everything goes smoothly, right? That's one sort of fantasy version. And at the other end of the spectrum, there is I lose. My client becomes very upset with me. My client loses their, and you can fill in the laundry list of what that would look like in your mind's eye example. Because of that, nobody ever wants to work with you again. And you lose your job. And because you lose your job, you then lose your house, and everybody in your life decides to abandon you. And so you are alone by the river living in a tent, right? And in my brain, this is how things work, right? It's either you're winning or you're losing, and there's no middle ground, right? It's like one extreme or the other. And so whenever I would think about situations like that, I'd often default to the worst case scenario. I also love the best case scenario, but the reality is that there are so many different possibilities between the best and the worst case scenario. And if you think about horror films, I think they're pretty classic when it comes to worst case scenarios. And I believe Alfred Hitchcock, who you may know, is a very well-known filmmaker, or at least he used to be. I recognize that I am now of a certain generation, so not everybody may have heard about Alfred Hitchcock, but he had a way of building tension into horror movies. And the way that he built tension wasn't by showing everybody what the monster at the end of the book looked like. His way of building tension was to plant seeds, to plant ideas, because he knew that the viewer had the capacity in their imagination to create something more scary, horrible than he ever could by actually showing you this thing on the screen. And it's true, right? The fantasy that you'll come up with likely is better than anything that you could ever actually experience. I mean, maybe sometimes you can create the fantasy and build it exactly as the fantasy, but I'd say that's the exception. And in the same way, the worst case scenario is also fairly most likely to happen, right? That really worst case scenario of the tent by the river, like you have to go through a lot of steps to get there. And so in your mind's eye, that might be the next alternative, right? It's the best case or the worst case. But what about all those scenarios in between? So if you think about, let's say, the meeting example, and you want to say something, okay, well, what's the best case scenario? You say something and everybody applauds. They're like, wow, that's the most brilliant thing we've ever heard. Like, why were you not leading these meetings all along? Maybe that's the best case. Maybe a middle case is that people listen to your idea and someone says, that's a really great idea. I hadn't thought of it that way. How could we apply that in this situation? And then a discussion ensues, right? That I would say is a pretty good outcome. Maybe you offer an idea and somebody listens to the idea and they say, yeah, we thought about that and it doesn't really work here, right? So maybe it's not perfect, but it's not bad. It's kind of neutral. Or maybe it's, oh my gosh, like, did you really just say that? I mean, I don't think anybody would say that in a meeting, or maybe somebody thinks that and your idea falls flat. And so you feel a bit sheepish, but guess what? You survived. And so next time you go into a meeting, maybe you know that when you do go to speak, that you're going to phrase it a little bit differently, or you're going to try a different approach. So maybe you didn't get the outcome you wanted. Maybe you're a bit disappointed. Maybe you're a bit embarrassed, but you also have learned from that. So, and then there's multiple other scenarios that you could come up with. So if, going back to this idea of reducing uncertainty, if you can think about what the potential outcomes are in advance, right? Give yourself a range and then explore those ranges, right? Are you okay with that? If, let's say, the worst case scenario is that you put your name in for partnership and they don't accept your application, or they say it's too early for you to apply, then it's disappointing, but maybe it also opens up a window for you. Okay, well, what would I need to do? What would I need to show you in order for you to say yes to me taking the next step? Now you've got some data. Maybe they tell you, well, you're so close. And we looked at what you've done so far and you've checked all these boxes, right? And maybe they tell you what those boxes are, or you ask. But we see that you're missing in these 3 areas. And you look at those 3 areas and you say, yeah, I could totally do that. Or maybe they say, well, I mean, you're so far off the mark, right? We've got these 10 other people ahead of you, and they are more likely candidates, and they might not use that direct language, but maybe that's what they're saying to you in less direct language. And so for you to get there, number one, you'll need to wait at least 3 years. And number two, these are all the things that you would need to change. Currently, you're not on track. You may then act on that information. Either you decide, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do, and you can dig your heels in, you can get to work and you can make that happen. Or you can also say, well, okay, this is not at all what I had in mind. Clearly, I was under a completely different impression of what was going on here. And now you've got that information and you can move forward. So you're taking a situation, you're looking at the different options, you're saying, this could happen, that could happen. And based on the potential outcomes, you're developing a plan. So all we're really reducing here is the degree of uncertainty, right? Here are some examples of outcomes. You're probably not going to predict exactly what will happen, but you're able to troubleshoot, I would say, with a reasonable degree of confidence or certainty, some of the potential options. And when you start to do that, then you reduce, in your mind at least, the degree of uncertainty that you are potentially facing. So that's step one, is we want to reduce the uncertainty at a factual level by focusing on the process, the steps that you take to increase the certainty of outcome. And we also want to take an approach of identifying potential outcomes and anticipating what we would do in order to decrease the uncertainty of what could possibly happen. That vague question with a vague answer, it's very broad, to what are some specific things, right? And you'll see that there is a wide range of things that could happen, and that hopefully will then increase your certainty of what could potentially happen and also increase your confidence. I'm confident that if that were to happen, I'd still be fine. I could move on. I could live with that. That brings us to the second bridge, which is to think about confidence as this threshold emotion. And I think where people get stuck, and I know that I have done this myself and I see other people do this, is that confidence becomes this precondition to acting, right? It's like the opposite is start before you're ready, right? That's kind of a little catchphrase I learned at some point in my coaching journey. Start before you're ready. Well, what's also going on there is perhaps start before you feel confident. If we wait to feel confident, we're in a little bit of a chicken egg waiting game, which is going to come first, right? And if you don't build your confidence some way, then that thing may never happen, right? If you're waiting to be sure that your partnership application will be approved, then you might wait for a long time. Or if you wait until the perfect opportunity where you're absolutely certain it's going to work out, then you might be waiting indefinitely because that opportunity may never present. If you wait for the perfect moment to speak up in the meeting, that may not happen. If you wait until you're ready to put your hand up to take on that next challenge, you might be waiting for a very long time. I can tell you that the greatest growth opportunities for me come from situations where I don't yet feel confident. I give myself a task that is beyond my current capacity, a stretch goal, and I work my way up to that goal, right? And this is what I encourage all of you to do, right? What are the stretch goals that you want? Where are the places where you know that you want to expand your confidence? Can you give yourself a goal to do that? So what does that mean, right? If confidence is a block, one way of approaching that from a different lens is to say, okay, what if confidence is not the precondition that is required for me to move forward? And I've talked about this on the podcast before. I think it's been a while. And so I want to revisit this idea that if confidence seems like too high a bar, what else could you channel that would get you moving forward? So if you think about raising your hand in a meeting, maybe that's something where you don't feel confident, but you feel willing, right? I'm willing to take the risk that I'll say something that won't land. I'm willing to take the risk that I'll be judged. I'm willing to take the risk that I'll say something that people don't agree with because it's important to me to practice a skill. It's important to me to have my voice heard. It's important to me that I stop sitting there and missing opportunities to say something when I know I've got something important to say. Maybe it's giving feedback to somebody on your team. You maybe don't feel confident that you're going to deliver the feedback in the best way possible, but you feel committed to that person. You feel committed to the process. You feel committed to the fact that you know that you can help them deliver a better product, and that will benefit the client. It will benefit them. It will benefit you. And so you may not feel confident, but you feel committed. Courage is another one, right? You may not feel certain or confident that the thing that you do is going to result in exactly what you want or what your client wants, but you feel courageous, right? You are willing to take on the challenge because it is important. It is important to your client. It's important to you. It's important to something perhaps greater than what is going on in the moment. If you think about those cases where you're advancing something that has the impact, the potential to impact more than just your client, right? There's real push, there's a real pull, there's a real driver there from a broader perspective. So courage is another one of those emotions, right? If we think about confidence as being an emotion, I feel confident. What else could you feel that would compel you to take the action, even though you don't feel confident yet? So that is your second one. And an example of this I quite like is a coach named Dan Sullivan. He's a coach, I believe, with a strategic coach, and he has a model, the 4 C's of confidence. And the whole punchline of his model is that confidence is the byproduct, not the precondition to taking on new challenges. And in his model, you start with commitment. So you commit to an outcome. Then you step into courage. And I love what he says about courage, that courage does not feel good, right? If we're waiting for it to feel good, we could be waiting a very long time. So if we go into it with the expectation that courage is going to feel a bit yucky, great, right? We've lowered our expectations. And if we feel yucky, we're right on track. So keep going, because that's when you start to develop your capability. The more you do something, the more you test, the more you try, the more you learn, the more you increase your capability. And that then helps you build your confidence. So you get that certainty, to tie it back to today's theme, because you've built up that level of competency, that capability. You've had the courage to figure it out, to try it. You've committed, and the reward at the end of it is confidence. So for you, again, thinking about what is going to motivate you, everybody will have a different thing that motivates them. So words that mean a lot to me, I will do something and feel determined to do it. I will feel willing to experience whatever the trade-offs could be. I might feel persistent. I might feel courageous. This is important. I want to do it even if it doesn't feel good. So for you, you'll want to think about what emotion other than confidence will have you moving in that direction. And that brings us to strategy number 3. So you can see how we're building bridges, right? If you're on one side of the river and you're trying to cross over, you can see, okay, so I can work with the facts. I can get myself a process. I can kind of narrow down the potential outcomes. So I'm just less scared. I don't feel that sense of uncertainty because I've got more certainty. I can see that there's less certainty, and my confidence has built itself up as a related factor, right? The more certainty I have, the more confidence I feel. And then you might look at that second one is, okay, well, if I don't feel confident, what else could I channel that would get me in motion? Start before you're ready. And then there's this third bridge, right? So we're building lots of bridges, which we might need if we've got a really big raging river. Like, let's bring out all the tools that we need. So that brings us to the third one. And that is this kind of, it's really making the task itself not optional. It's making it a non-negotiable for you. Now, this one is a little bit trickier in the sense that it's that point of no return. It is the decision that, it's almost like something has stirred inside of you. The decision has been made. And sometimes this will be externally imposed. So if you think about, the example that speaks most loudly to me in my personal life is, and I spoke about this recently on the podcast, is when my children were younger and my daughter was about to start kindergarten and my son was already in elementary school. And so the big dream for me at that point was my children, 2 of them, would go to the same school. That meant a single drop-off, a single set of emails, a single set of administration. I was all for it. And my life was about to get so much simpler. And there was this weird zoning thing that came up, short story, that daughter would go to different school relative to son. Schools were, 20-minute walk apart. And so I just thought this is not cool. And they weren't going to grandfather children into the policy. So as a result, I went a little bit crazy. I became a fierce advocate for my children and for opposing this thing that was about to happen. And I give that as an example because it was a non-negotiable for me. Like, there was no land in which this was okay. There was no gray zone where I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to let this happen. I mean, at first, when I first saw the email, I was like, this is a joke. There's no way this is going to happen. But it wasn't a joke. Like, it actually kept moving forward. And when I realized people weren't making it stop, I was like, I have to say something. I have to do something. So it's almost like there was no option for me. It was black and white. And for you, there may be cases where something just becomes black or white. For some people, it's like, you're working in an environment. Maybe it's with a particular client, or it's in a particular job, or it's in a particular setting, or it's on a particular file. Like you're doing this thing, you're going along with it, you're kind of putting up with it. And then one day it's like the straw that broke the camel's back, and there's a flip that switches and you just say no, like I'm not doing this anymore. And from that point, it's like you've hit the point of no return, and there's a freedom in that. And I see this sometimes with lawyers who are like, I was able to do this up until this point, but I just cannot do it anymore. And once you've reached that point, to me, you've actually reached a point of clarity, right? One big decision has been made, right? This is not working. Once you've made that decision, that next decision is hard still. Where do you go next? Let's say it's a job. Let's say you're leaving, you're going somewhere else. It is hard. But what's not hard is that where you are right now is no longer an option. That type of flip switching, that binary yes, no, that non-negotiable decision making, it has a way of putting courage on the back burner, or confidence on the back burner, uncertainty on the back burner. You no longer need those things because you've made that decision. That decision is so important. The other factors simply don't matter anymore. So you can think of that as a bridge too, where you're lacking certainty, you're lacking confidence, but you know that this thing is not working. Therefore, you must get away, or the thing that you're moving toward, the thing that you want is so important, right? It is so important that you cannot not do it. Those are decisions. Those are deal-breaking, needle-moving, black or white decisions. And when you've got that need for certainty, that need for confidence falls away. Yes, you still need to have a certain degree of confidence. Yes, it helps if you do feel confident, but I don't think, based on my experience, based on experience I've heard other people go through, that, I need it to be certain component is so much less important. So that binary decision, and maybe we're getting back to Dan Sullivan and his commitment. I've heard multiple different versions of that point of no return, right? Burn the bridges, burn the boats, quit your job and then you have no choice. You can't go back there. You need to move forward. That might be the best option for you, right? You may simply have the courage and the confidence and the clarity to say, this is not working. I'm leaving. That has made the decision for you. Now you're moving forward. Sometimes that is the best thing you can do. That's what I mean. You've made that decision. So that is bridge number 3. Bridge number 4. Now this bridge is a little bit different. And this bridge is to say, okay, up until this point, we've really tied the idea of confidence and certainty together, right? We looked at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition where these two went hand in hand. But what if confidence did not require certainty, right? What if those two were not required, right? What if you could walk into a situation and have no idea, no certainty over the outcome, and yet still feel confident, right? What would that look like for you? And I thought it would be fun to offer up another definition, this one coming from the Oxford Online Dictionary, which says confidence is the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something, firm trust. So, and I love that last part, firm trust. It doesn't use the language of certainty, right? It uses the language of a feeling or belief that you can rely on something or someone. It's not so much tied to the outcome. And then it goes back to that idea of trust. So what if, regardless of the outcome, you could feel confident? And when I think about this idea, right, this idea of can you feel confident without being certain in the outcome? Number one, I think it's a lot easier to feel that sense of confidence when you've gone through the other steps, right? You have a process, you've identified the potential avenues that could happen. You have played with other emotions. Maybe confidence is too high of a bar, but you can feel courage or you can feel willing. Maybe you've reached that point where this is a done deal in your head. Like you already know that you're going to do it anyways. And so you might as well do it and feel confident, right? It's easier if you've gone through those other steps. But there's an added layer to this. And the added layer is that when you can reach a point where you can believe, like truly, truly believe that regardless of the outcome, it's how it is supposed to happen, then there is a weight that is lifted off your shoulder that almost lifts the tension in a way. It lifts that sense of unsettledness, that doubt, that, but what if feeling? What if it's exactly how it's supposed to go? And when I was in my coaching training, they talked about trusting the process, right? Somebody was asking about the program, and one of the coach teachers said, you need to trust the process. And yeah, it's a little bit cliche to say that, right? Trust in the process. However, if you can bring yourself to trust in the process, right? To trust that whatever happens is the right thing to have happened, then there is a freedom in that to move forward. So for some people that will be spiritual, right? You may believe based on your faith that this is meant to be, that there is a greater power, and that greater power has a sense of order. There is a purpose. You may not see it now, but it is there. And it may be more of a philosophical approach to life, that the way things are happening is exactly as they are supposed to unfold. If they don't end the way that you want them to, then it isn't over yet, right? You think about a movie, and if you were to watch a film from beginning to end, if you were to stop the movie probably at the 2/3 mark, right? Everything's probably a mess, right? You kind of have to watch till the end of the movie because that's when everything gets wrapped up, assuming you're watching a movie where things do get wrapped up. That doesn't always happen. So in your world, right, if you think about the risk and the uncertainty, and you can live, right? You can say, I'm willing to feel confident even though I don't have certainty of outcome, right? You're able to have that faith. You hear people talk about a leap of faith. That is another way for you to build that bridge from uncertainty over to confidence, right? You simply say, I'm just not going to wrap up my sense of confidence, that feeling of confidence, with the need for certainty. And I'd love for you to pause here just for a moment and think about times in your life where you have taken what you may have described as a leap of faith. And I know for myself, I have moments in my life where I have taken a leap of faith. I think I gave an example in the podcast in the summertime. We bought tickets to go to Paris. Now, I know this is kind of an off-the-wall example, but it's just the way that the circumstances were all set up. When I hit the button on my computer that purchased the tickets, there was this moment of faith of this is going to work out. And of course it did. I mean, it was a trip to Paris. But you can imagine leaving a job that you've been in for years. When you send the email to the person that you report to, knowing that you're setting up a meeting where you're going to tell them that you're not going to be there anymore, that you're going somewhere else, there is a feeling that comes with that, right? Maybe not for everybody, but certainly for me, that is this sense of, okay, I'm entering the unknown. When you have a difficult conversation with someone, have you ever had that experience, right? Where it's like you're at a crossroads, right? You could talk about the safe thing. You could avoid the difficult conversation, and you choose to say something instead. It's like there's that moment where it almost takes your breath away, for me at least. And so what I'm inviting you to think about here is that last stage, right? You want to do the thing, right? You want to speak up. You want to put your name in the hat for that next opportunity. You want to speak at that event. And so you say yes. You say yes, knowing that you're not quite there yet, knowing that the path ahead is uncertain, and yet choosing to have the confidence in yourself that this is going to work out, that no matter what happens, even if you get on stage and you freeze for the first minute, it's okay that you put your name in for the opportunity and you don't get it, that it's okay. So that last piece is just developing that sense of confidence that everything is going to be fine, no matter what. So just to recap, we've talked about this idea that confidence and certainty are so often linked hand in hand. And the reality is your practice and your life are going to be filled with uncertainty. And yes, that makes it a little bit more challenging. It also makes it so much more beautiful and interesting. And the more you challenge yourself, the more growth opportunities you have, the more often you're going to find yourself in situations where there is uncertainty. And what is going to be required of you then is a willingness, right? A willingness to decide that despite uncertainty, even in situations where maybe you don't feel confident, that you are going to go ahead. You're willing to do the work. The bridges that we talked about, these are like, forgive me, but they're like toll bridges, right? If you think about those bridges to connect one part of the world to another, one city to another, one super fast highway from A to B, and there is a price attached to these bridges. They don't come for free. They come from you putting in the effort. They come from you putting in the time to think about what they're going to be, you developing the process, you brainstorming about the possibilities, you deciding that courage is going to be good enough for now. Commitment is good enough for now, right? It requires that you may need to do things that are outside of your comfort zone, right? Difficult conversations. You might need to ask yourself some pretty tough questions, right? If I think about the lawyers that I work with who are transitioning from one role to another, we talk about a lot of really personal questions about, where they are, what they like, what they don't like, what they want. And I think this is really hard work. This is really hard, especially if you haven't done it in a while. You haven't reflected on these questions in quite a while. So you can expect that if what you're doing feels uncertain, right? That you don't feel confident. There's that, again, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, however you would describe that feeling, that there is quite a bit of work sometimes on your part in order to cross that bridge, to build that bridge and then cross it, right? It's a willingness to let things be messy, right? If you think about what that could look like, right? Imagine you've never spoken in court or at a meeting, you've never led a deal, and now you're leading a team. Well, of course it's going to be messy. Of course you're going to make mistakes. Of course you're going to do things one way and realize immediately that it would have been so much better to do it another way. Or maybe it takes time, but you can allow it to be messy, because what will eventually happen is that it will become less messy over time. And you also need, so there's that willingness to pay for that bridge, pay the toll, whatever form that toll takes. There also needs to be that desire to grow, right? And that could be a desire that you have innate to you that is pulling you towards something different, right? It's like there's a calling, there's something that you need to do, you want to do, you see it, and you are going to go after it no matter what. It could also be that the growth is motivated by an external force that is pushing you out, right? You are no longer happy where you are. You know you need to move forward, but you just don't know yet what that looks like. So in either case, you are making a choice at some point along the road that you're choosing to grow, right? So examples that come to mind, for example, you choose that you want to learn how to speak at a conference. You sign up as a speaker on a conference. You've now stepped firmly outside of your comfort zone. You do everything you can to prepare, etc. You're growing, right? You're building that confidence muscle willingly. An example where it might be brought upon you may be, maybe you're appointed to speak, right? Someone says, hey, that thing, you're doing it. Or maybe you're in a job, for example, and maybe you don't love it. And then there's a big shift in terms of the structuring of the place that you're at, whether it's a firm, whether it's an organization. Maybe your role no longer exists, right? Or your group decides to disband. And now you need to find another opportunity. So you can see how in either case, you need to make a choice, right? You need to choose that you're moving on to the next thing. And so by doing that, you then follow those steps, right? You decide that even though the outcome, the next step, is not necessarily certain, you may not feel confident yet, you are going to choose to become that, right? You're going to choose to do the thing that may not result the way that you want, right? That thing where there is that uncertainty. And so what happens over time, right, is that if you do this, right, you decide you're on that path to growth, you decide to pursue opportunities that currently are beyond your capacity, you've never done them before, then you will start to build that confidence, right? We go back to Dan Sullivan and confidence as the byproduct. You're now building your skill set, you're building your capacity, your competency. You have more spheres in which you feel confident. So there's that direct relationship with confidence. And what's also happening is the more you practice this, right? The more you get outside of your comfort zone, the more you practice that meta skill of reaching and building, the more comfortable you get with that positioning of yourself in the uncertainty. And I know that for a lot of lawyers that I work with, this is one of those muscles that needs a lot of work because you're used to having things go perfectly. You're used to having things succeed the first time that you try it. And so if you're in a situation where that no longer feels like it's going to happen, that can create a lot of stress. It can create a lot of anxiety around that. Ooh, what's going to happen there? It feels so unfamiliar. And yet that same feeling of unfamiliarity can be your ticket to growth. So with that, I'm going to offer you a challenge this week. This is fun. And I have to go back to my notes. So what I'd love for you to practice is exactly what we've talked about today, is to look for places where there's a bit of a confidence gap, where maybe there's a certainty gap. And I'd just like you to practice, right? Try something small, something low stakes. Maybe it's driving a different route to work. Maybe it's trying a new recipe. Maybe it's sparking up a conversation with a stranger. And we just want to use that as a training ground for you, right? Think about how you're going through these different steps. What kind of process are you using? What are the emotions that you might need to solicit, right? If it's striking up a conversation with a stranger and you're not used to doing that, maybe you don't feel confident, but you're willing. You're willing to try this thing out that Paula suggested on her podcast. That point of no return, right? You can imagine you're in line to grab coffee and maybe you just say something. You've hit that point of no return. You've kind of initiated. There may be other examples you can think of where, you're trying a new recipe, you go and you buy all the ingredients, you declare that you're having a dinner party and this is what you're making. I mean, it could be really public. It could just be, a meal you make for yourself, but, you hit that point of no return, you invest. And then finally, that idea of, can you just choose to feel confident, right? Can you just say, I have no idea how this is going to unfold, but I feel good about it. I feel confident that this is the right move and I'll give it my best. I'll give it my all. And regardless of what happens, I'm choosing that. I'm choosing to feel that way. And these are little habits. I'd just like you to try them on a small scale and then build your way up. So with that, I am going to thank you so much for being here and joining me for this week's podcast episode. It's been a pleasure as always. And I'd love to invite you to reach out to me if this resonated with you and you find that a lack of certainty, a lack of confidence is keeping you stuck, because I can help you with that. And it could be that you're working up the courage to, put up some guardrails around your time. I don't think we often draw a link between confidence, uncertainty, and time management, but it's there. It's real. When you feel more confident about how you're spending your time and confident about yourself and your ability to set the tone in your practice, that can have a huge impact on your day-to-day. It might be confidence in terms of your performance at work. You might be second guessing yourself a lot and you find that it's slowing you down. So I can help you with that. It might be a difficult conversation that you're avoiding, you're dreading, and you want someone to sit with you and actually contextualize that conversation, help you draw out a map, right? A plan for how you can approach that conversation, literally how to build out that conversation, what to say, how to react depending on what they say. So we can absolutely do that. You might want to work up your courage to leave a role that you're in where you feel like this is not working for whatever reason. You're like a potted plant and you are bursting out of that container and you just need something new. We can talk about that. It could also be that you're leading a team, right? I alluded to feedback a few minutes ago, and you know that you need to be giving more direct feedback and you're struggling with that because you don't want to hurt people's feelings. You don't want people to quit on you. And so maybe that's an area where we could have a chat. What would it be like to have those conversations? So these are all examples. They are by no means exhaustive, but I do know that for lawyers out there who are struggling with this, that support can really help, whether it's me, whether it's another coach, whether it's a mentor, a friend, a trusted advisor, confidant, please don't stay stuck. There are people out there who really want you to succeed, who really want to see you succeed, who want to help you with that. I'm one of them. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to wish you a beautiful week and I'll look forward to reconnecting again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.